I'm delighted that our regular guest, Jack Elsom, the political editor of The Sun, is with me now. Jack, how are you doing today? You all right?
Yes, busy day here in Parliament, Peter.
Yeah,
but,
can
soldiering on.
imagine. So, do you think that what's your sort of general view of this migration plan? Because some people think, well, they went in hard nosed on Sunday, what they briefed to the paper Saturday, Sunday. Now, some of the less popular bits are coming out, and of course, there's attacks from both the left and the right. What's your assessment of it?
Well, listen, I think that Shabana Mahmood did a good job in the Commons yesterday. She wiped the floor with a lot of the left-wing criticism, which basically was howls of outrage at something which I think that most people in this country thinks that we should get to grips with. Clearly, the asylum system is broken, is being abused, and she laid out numerous examples yesterday. And I think the package goes some way to correcting that. I think that clearly you have fears from the left. I think that Shabana Mahmood is happy to have that row. And at the moment, it does seem to be the usual suspects in her party who are piping up to attack it. I think the real danger, though, is trying to get this through the system because it is such a big package of reforms. I think there's a danger of trying to get this through the Home Office machine, trying to get it through the legislative process in Parliament, which can take absolutely ages and drag on. That could take months, even a year to happen. And I think that when it is something so big, a lot of people just look at it and go, it's never actually going to happen, is it? It almost seems too good to be true. This is what you've heard Nigel Farage saying today, that yes, it was performative. Yes, it was great rhetoric. Actually, is it ever going to be implemented? That will be the proof in the pudding. So Shabana Mahmood is very good at the tough talk and the rhetoric. It's now about delivering.
Do you think a parliamentary arithmetic is going to be a matter here at all, or will it just go through? Will the Labour MPs do what they're told to do? Can you see the same sorts of issues that we saw with the welfare bill, for example, Jack?
No, I think most of the party will wear it, and we did have a lot of engagement in terms of the Home Office with the Parliamentary Labour Party over the asylum plans beforehand, to really put in that legwork, something they did not do with the welfare changes whatsoever. They were really caught on the hop with that massive rebellion earlier in the summer. There's been much more groundwork put in ahead of time, really taking MPs into rooms, showing them the abuses of the asylum system to try and roll the pitch for what happened yesterday. And so I do think that while some MPs in her party will be squeamish about some of the changes, and clearly removing children seems to be a big bone of contention for some of her backbenchers, I think she will be able to get most of them to hold their noses and vote for this, simply because they know that their electoral chances live or die with trying to get this through. You know, Downing Street is desperate for immigration not to be the #1 issue in this country at the time of the next election. They want to shoot reforms Fox so they can focus on more comfortable territory, things like public services, things like the NHS, things like the cost of living. They do not want to fight the next election on illegal immigration. That means getting to grips with it now so it goes away by 2029.
There's an awful lot of detail in this 33-page plan, and your paper, The Sun, has revealed so much about free maths tutors, better GP access, 2 GPs for 800 people. I mean, how has that gone down in Parliament? Certainly our viewers and listeners aren't happy about it. I know Sun readers won't be either. How much is that being talked about, or is that being lost in the many, many details of this plan?
Yeah, you're right, because today in the newspaper, we clearly devote a lot of time to going through the plan, but the plan was widely trailed ahead of time. And so we decided to dominate the front page with things that haven't potentially been addressed in terms of the abuses of the system. Stuff like we've talked about free taxis for migrants in the past. We also talk about the live contracts in terms of the perks for migrants. So that's stuff like free GP appointments, but also free maths tutors, free art and craft classes, just things which ordinary British people get absolutely infuriated with. Where is that in terms of this plan? Clearly, she wants to get the backlog down, but there are currently hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayer money being spent on contracts with providers, which just give the most obscene and outrageous waste of public money. And so I think what happened yesterday was a good start by the Home Secretary, and clearly in terms of trying to deter and deport people, that is good. But the system itself at the moment is just so unwieldy and so big that trying to root out all of the asylum abuse cases is going to be another task altogether. And I think that is where Shabana Mahmood really needs to get under the bonnet and start fixing this. We've been promised something on taxis, for example. We've talked about it on this show before. You know, 2 months ago, when the BBC first revealed that migrants were taking taxis from their hotels to GP appointments, something which normal British people did not get whatsoever. They're expected to take a bus or make their own way or whatever. She said that she would commission an urgent investigation into this, and she would put a stop to it. That's been 2 months ago. That doesn't strike me as an urgent investigation, especially when it's a matter of just going upstairs, going to your senior civil servants and saying, let's rip this contract up, because that is clearly not fair at the moment. So it's those sort of things I think she needs to get to grip with.
Yeah, and the agility or lack of in regard to the Home Office, and also the question of what on earth Yvette Cooper was doing for a year. Let's talk about another political leader, Nigel Farage. He hosted a press conference. He set out Reform UK's thoughts on the economy. Let's see what he said.
Taxes up to a post-war high. Debt exploding, debt repayments becoming unsustainable. The explosion in sheer numbers of those living on a variety and range of benefits, totally uncontrolled mass migration, and certainly not selective migration, and people leaving the country. Not just the Londoms, but wealthy big taxpayers, young entrepreneurs leaving the country. It's a pretty grim situation.
Nigel Farage there, the leader of Reform UK. What is their alternative? They've talked about a £25 billion black hole, Jack.
Yeah, well, clearly we know how the next budget is going to go next week. On Wednesday, Rachel Reeves is going to stand up. She's going to blame almost everyone but herself for what she's about to do in terms of tax rises. She'll blame the OBR, she'll blame the Conservatives, she'll blame economic headwinds, she'll blame Donald Trump and the rest of it. Some of that might wash, but I suspect that most people will tell her to look in the mirror. And I think that what Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch are trying to do is say tax rises are not the only option here. There's other sides of the ledger. Clearly, growth at the moment in this country is not doing very well. She's got her borrowing rules sensibly, I think, so that she doesn't constantly put more money on the slate. But what about all this spending? We spend about £1.5 trillion in terms of public service spending, public sector spending in this country every year. What about that side of the ledger? What about things like benefits? So Nigel Farage today talking about getting the benefits bill down. What about foreign aid? Nigel Farage said he'd cap foreign aid at £1 billion. So he's come up with a platter of savings, which he says amounts to about 25-30 billion, which we believe to be the size of the black hole. And so he's saying that rather than just reaching for the tax lever, which this government has done multiple times, actually, let's look at some of the eye-watering spending, which at the moment, Rachel Reeves doesn't seem to be willing to touching. And, when she's giving this budget next week, she's really trying to talk to three constituents. She's trying to talk to the markets clearly by saying we've got the finances under control to the point where we're not just racking up more and more debt. She's speaking to the country in terms of trying to say that we've got a good hand on the finances. That's going to be seen. But really, there's going to be a big part of next week, which is about her parliamentary party. She knows that she is very vulnerable to do with the parliamentary party. There's lots of unhappiness with the direction of her treasury. Many people would like to see her borrow more money. And they're very unhappy with any sort of thought about about spending cuts. And so I think that is where the bone of contention is going to be. And that's where the political battle lines are going to be drawn. There's not going to be much in the way of spending cuts next Wednesday. Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch both saying there must be. Otherwise, in the words of Kemi Badenoch, Labour could bankrupt Britain.
Just one thing that's happened in the last few hours, Jack, is this warning about, we're going to talk about this next actually in more detail, but the warning about Chinese interference with our democracy. Clearly this has been a problem for a long time, but a stark warning from MI5, Jack.
Yeah, this really came as a, I would say a bolt from the blue today. In some regards it did, although we've been having warnings from MI5 for a while now on this. Essentially, the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, sent an email round, pretty alarming email to MPs, peers and their staff with a new espionage notice from the security services, which not only said that Chinese spies are trying to recruit people within the Westminster Village on LinkedIn and other social media sites, but actually named two people who pose as headhunters who try and reach out to staff, MPs and the like, and try and essentially get them to dish information, which they then pass back to the Chinese security services and even try and recruit them as officers. And clearly this whole thing has been framed in the recent row on Chinese spies. And Tories, Reform and critics are saying if not this, then what is going to wake this government up to the threat that China poses? And it's not just this government, to be fair. The last government also grappled with it. And it is that constant tightrope which ministers have to walk between, yes, clearly China is a massive, massive threat to this country, and they constantly try and bombard and sabotage and infiltrate with various attacks. But do we need their economic might and their trade? And so that is clearly a balance at the moment. And there's been calls for China to be placed into the top tier of this foreign influence register scheme, and it seems absolutely baffling to most people that China is not placed in that highest sanction level. But yeah, it's very worrying, I think, in Westminster. It does feel that these attacks are becoming more coordinated. In the words of MI5, they are targeted and widespread. And so there has been calls in the back of this really sort of tighten up the regime on China. And Security Minister Dan Jarvis was in the Commons earlier. It came out with a pretty cobbled together package, a few more million for crypto technology, but it didn't really seem to address the key question of what actually is our strategy towards China, because the government's saying we're challenging, we're cooperating, competing, but at the moment it doesn't seem that anything materially is actually changing.
Yeah. Jack, thank you. That's Jack Elsom there, political editor of The Sun.